There we go.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and thanks for joining us for another virtual event this afternoon. And we are delighted to have with us Tom Mead, who has a brand new book called The House, excuse me, The House at Devil's Neck. And our batch of signed copies, that I'm told, is on its way to us right now. Um, they're holding up copies of it. I brought some other treats. Here's some of Tom's backlist. Um, and also, Barbara, it's probably worth bringing up this terrific Crippen and Landru collection,
Absolutely.
the Indian rope trick.
Yep.
Sorry, I lost my voice. The hardcover limited edition comes with this cool extra pamphlet, the wager. And we have, I think, maybe three of these left. And we also have trade paperback editions. So I'll try to put links to all this stuff on the comments field. So if you have any questions for Tom or Barbara, go ahead and type them in. And I'll be lurking here until Barbara summons me back on screen.
I
So
love
Barbara,
that. It's so
you.
powerful. I love it. Just like conjuring Patrick up. Thank you very much, Patrick. Hi, Tom. It's really nice to see you again. Tom and I had an earlier discussion with his publisher, as a matter of fact, about the book and agreed that it would be nice to do this. And Tom signed our books in New York, so they will be with us shortly. So I believe this is the fourth book in the Joseph Spectre series. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, indeed. The House at Devil's Neck. It's the fourth in the series of Golden Age inspired locked room mysteries. Thank you very much for having me back, Barbara. It's nice to see you again, and thank you everyone for tuning in as well.
Well, you're entirely welcome. For those of you who don't know Tom, I have a little bio here. He's an author, translator, and aficionado. I always love using the Spanish when we're about to discuss Golden Age Mystery. I mean, wow. Anyway, he's the creator of the Joseph Spectre Locked Room Mystery series, translated into 10 languages and soon to be adapted for screen. We'll come back to that because everybody always wants to know about that. The debut, Death and the Conjurer, was nominated for various awards, and then he wrote The Murder Wheel, and Patrick just held up Cabaret Macabre, and then he has a collection in The Indian Rope Trick and Other Violent Entertainments, which I think is an absolutely super title. And that comes from a specialist publisher called Crippen and Landru, whose whole gig is short stories in elegant hardcover editions, and then they do some paperback editions. So we happen to have all of those. But Tom got a fabulous review in the New York Times on yesterday, actually, which I will get to. But everybody, everybody talks about this series being kind of an homage, or at least a nod, not an actual homage, to John Dixon Carr and the Locked Room Mystery. And I think that while I, who have been reading mystery for 70 plus years, know what that means, and Tom clearly knows what that means, maybe all of you are not entirely clear. So let's talk first. Actually, Tom, for this book, we also need to talk about the Gothic because you've kind of married the two. But let's talk about John Dixon Carr. Who was he?
Well, he's a great place to start. He is a very much a hero of mine in the crime fiction world. John Dixon Carr was a purveyor of puzzle mysteries during the so-called Golden Age. So when we say Golden Age, usually we're referring to that the interwar decades. But he was born in Pennsylvania in 1906, so he was somewhat younger than a lot of the other Golden Age stalwarts like Agatha Christie. He was kind of the well, he was the kind of young firebrand of the Golden Age, if you like. He wrote Locked Room Mysteries, which, for those who don't know, a locked room mystery is the kind of most rarefied subgenre of the whodunit, because the locked room mystery is the most challenging and I suppose the most intellectually satisfying puzzle mystery, because it deals with a crime or an event which is seemingly impossible, something that appears completely physically impossible. So the imagery of the locked room sometimes is literal, as in a murder victim found in a room that's sealed up on the inside, and it appears that there's no conceivable way that the murderer could have got in or out. And so it seems that the killer must have had some kind of supernatural ability in order to perpetrate this perfect crime.
Or wait a minute, or that it was a suicide.
Well, that is this is where we get into the kind of controversial area with locked room mysteries, because there are a whole host of solutions, but uh, John Dixon Carr was, I think, the most innovative and creative when it came to truly ingenious solutions which have the appearance of something supernatural, but which, in fact, have a very rational earthly explanation. But it's interesting that you mention the appearance of a suicide, because this is a very popular device in the locked room mystery, and indeed it crops up in the house at Devil's Neck. We begin with seemingly a perfectly hermetically sealed locked room scenario. So we're in a room where an individual appears to have committed suicide. For all intents and purposes, he appears to have committed suicide in this study of his London townhouse. But well, I won't say too much, because there are various subplots within the house at Devil's Neck which all kind of dovetail together. But it starts off with this seemingly quite clean-cut locked room mystery scenario, but as the circumstances unfold and the other subplots come into play, we realize that there's a lot more to it. But John Dixon Carr, some of his greatest books were written during the 1930s, so the height of that golden age of the puzzle plot. And one that often gets talked about is The Hollow Man, as it was published in this country, aka The Three Coffins. And that is a book which, to me, it perfectly marries the surreal, bizarre stylings of the locked room mystery, which obviously these are not naturalistic plots. These are plots which are contrived to be as theatrical and spectacular and grandiose as possible to kind of bamboozle the reader. But The Hollow Man marries that approach with the kind of creeping eeriness of the Gothic. And to me, the best locked room mysteries are the ones that are infused with that hint that maybe there is something supernatural afoot. But then, of course, for it to be a legitimate, fair play locked room mystery, you do need a fair play solution at the end, which doesn't resort to otherworldly powers.
Or, in the words of, was it the Reverend Ronald Knox, no Chinaman, which basically meant that you couldn't ring in some, foreign devil or whatever.
Yes, a kind of deus ex machina to
Yes,
just
exactly.
resolve the plot. Yeah, I think, to me, I talk about this often when I do events like this, but to me, the key to a good mystery is a sense of retrospective inevitability. So a sense of, when you reach the denouement, you see everything fall into place, and you realize everything that has gone before assumes its proper context, and you see the relevance of the heretofore irrelevant details. They take on a new significance, and you realize, of course, there was only one conceivable solution all along. And to me, that's the kind of beating heart of the locked room mystery. That little moment, that kind of intellectual satisfaction that you get as the reader. So when I'm writing this Spectre series, I'm kind of chasing that effect, if you like.
Very well. So let me say first that John Dixon Carr, as Thomas pointed out, was born in America, but often we think of him as a British crime writer because he really produced almost all of his work living in England. And plug for Poison Pen Press, which let me say right now, Robert and I do not own. We sold it to Sourcebooks in 2018. So when I talk about Poison Pen Press, I'm not actually talking about me any longer as an editor, but we do, it did and still does publish the British Library Crime Classics. Martin Edwards writes most of the introductions to that series, and there are a lot of John Dixon Carr novels that the British Library has
Yeah. Some
reworked.
really great ones in the
Yeah,
last couple
really
of years.
are.
Yeah,
And
some of them very
one of
well.
the joys of the British Library Crime Classics is that they're apparently British Rail um, commissioned the most spectacular posters in the sort of golden age of train travel, um, or more than train travel. And so these British Library Crime Classics, which embrace all kinds of authors, and I highly recommend them, have these gorgeous posters as covers. And I think it's really interesting, whatever detective work they're doing at the British Library to find that perfect poster
Mm,
that fits. But the other thing that I think it's important to grasp is that um, the whole point of a locker room mystery is not necessarily who did it or why they did it, but how. And that differentiates it, because if you're reading other locker room mysteries, then, and you have a circle of suspects and all the rest of it, what you're really looking for is motive and then opportunity, and then whoever matches all that
mm.
turns out to be
Yeah.
unmasked as the killer. But in locker room mystery, what we're all reading it for is the how of it, to see whether the author devised a believable
Mhm.
impossible crime and whether you were able to figure it out before the author tells you how it happened. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. I think ideally a Locked mystery, the best Locked mysteries have elements of all those components. So there is a whodunit and a why at the heart of it. But you're right that the how is what differentiates the locked room from other types of mystery. Now, this is why I tend to liken a locked room puzzle to a magic trick, um, because I suppose in both instances, you're pulling off a kind of sleight of hand in front of an audience. You are guiding the audience's perception in a certain direction. You're making sure that they're looking the wrong way while the trick is working. And a lot of the principles of stage magic can readily be applied to the locked room puzzle. John Dixon Carr, whom obviously we've talked about, he was somebody who was fascinated by stage magic, and he wrote about it in various novels. And he established friendships with several magicians, including the likes of Clayton Rawson, who is an author who was himself a magician, but who wrote about a magician detective solving seemingly impossible crimes. This was the great Merlini, who appeared in Death from a Top Hat and a handful of other novels, plus some great short stories. And Carr and Rawson had this kind of friendly rivalry, if you like, which I find fascinating, where they would set each other challenges, or rather, they would contrive impossible situations for the other person to try and solve. And I love things like that. To me, that's the bread and butter of the locked room mystery world. It's all about playing games, if you like, playing games with the reader, but also as a writer, playing a kind of game with yourself, setting yourself a challenge and seeing how you can work your way out of it. And I think all of these approaches can be found in stage magic as well. I think a lot of it is about bamboozling an audience, but it's also about um, devising an effect that surprises you as the performer, if you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about Carr, but there are other writers. Reg Hill wrote one locked room mystery that I can remember. I'm not sure if it was a DeLille and Pasco, but I think it was. There
Yes,
is a woman named Gigi Pandian, an American author who has a magician sleuth, and she has written
yes.
several locked room mysteries.
Excellent. Yeah, Gigi and I are very good friends, and
Yeah,
she's
no,
another devotee of Carr and various other greats. From going back in time to the Golden Age, somebody that I often recommend to people is Cristiana Brand,
right.
who has also been reissued by the British Library Crime
That's right.
Classics
Green
series.
for Danger has always been one of my very favorites. But
And mine.
again, the British Library, and that is a locked room mystery in an operating room. So, you
Well, yes,
know,
it's I think virtually unique in the Golden Age world, in that it is set in a hospital during the Second World War in the English countryside. So it's set among doctors and nurses and the various skullduggeries that go on between that very close knit group of people. But the most ambitious and innovative of her locked room mystery titles to me is Death of Jezebel, which has also been reissued, and that is a locked room in a more of a symbolic sense, if you like, because it involves a murder that takes place on stage in front of an audience of hundreds of people, which
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I absolutely love the ambition of it and the creativity of the solution. But it's also a great exercise in kind of intellectual showboating, if you like, because Christiana Brand creates circumstances where you think there's no conceivable way that this crime could physically have been committed, and yet it has been, and so it has every appearance of being completely impossible. But
Right.
of course, there
I'm
is a
glad
solution.
she's getting more attention. My old friend, unfortunately deceased for quite a while, Robert Bernard, who wrote brilliant, I mean, totally brilliant mysteries of all
Yes.
different kinds. She was really among his very favorite authors. And, I'm trying to remember, did Peter Lovesey, who wrote One of Everything, did he write a locked room mystery?
Oh yes, of course. Peter Lovesey, one to my mind, one of the best post Golden Age locked room mysteries,
Okay.
Bloodhounds, which was one of his Peter Diamond novels. He had locked room elements in various other bits and various short stories and things, but the one that always springs to my mind is Bloodhounds. Not only because it's a great puzzle, it's on a it features a locked room murder on a canal narrowboat, which to me is quite original in itself. But it also features tons of references to John Dixon Carr and the like. And the titular Bloodhounds are a group of mystery fiction aficionados who meet to discuss puzzle plots. And so there are a lot of in jokes and fun little references for people like me who love nerding out about all that kind of thing.
I really miss Peter. He was brave enough, even though he was dying, to do a Zoom interview with me in December um, for his last Peter Diamond book. And I was hesitant to ask him, but in the end, he was happy that I did, and he was brave enough to do it. And just afterward, or in fact, maybe a couple of months ago, I came across a complete collection of his short stories that I'm trying to remember which, it might be Allison and Busby, but anyway, some British publisher has put it out. It's not available here in the United States, but we have imported some from the UK. And when you read through them, the mind of Peter Lovesey, his unbelievably agile ability to create crimes, all different characters. I mean, it's truly magnificent. I'm
Yes,
so sad that we've lost him, but I'm also grateful how much he left for us to enjoy.
absolutely. Well, I often think of Peter Lovesey as one of the last kind of links to the golden age, if you like. I mean, his earliest novels were reviewed by John Dixon Carr for Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine in the early 70s. So he was a kind of direct descendant of that golden age lineage, if you like. Sadly, I never got to meet Peter,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I know. I wish that I had. We corresponded, and he was very generous with his support for Death and the Conjurer, my first book. And he very kindly sent me a copy of Abracadabra, one of his great Sergeant Cribb
Right.
mysteries, which features stage magic in it, because
It does.
obviously that's a favorite subject of mine, and the Joseph Spectre series is built around stage magic. So it was a very nice, it was a very generous thing of him to do, and he was yes, like I say, he was very generous with his praise, because he didn't know me from Adam, but I'd sent him a copy of Death and the Conjurer, and he was very kind. But I think when it comes to Peter Lovesey, the titles that I recommend the most would be the Bloodhounds, which I've mentioned, but also the False Inspector Dew, which is a standalone, but it's almost a kind of a black comedy. It's got elements of farce to it, and it's set on the Mauritania, the ship in the aftermath of the capture of infamous wife murderer Dr. Crippen. But it uses that as a kind of springboard for a very comic plot of impersonations and deceptions, and a very deftly concealed murderer. So that's another great one of his that I always like to recommend to people.
Well, I think it's absolutely true that Peter really is kind of our last link, as you point out, to the golden age. I mean, I've lived long enough to have read so many of them in real time, and losing them one by one is hard. But let's talk now for a moment about the Gothic. Some years ago,
Mm.
a couple of our great crime writers here, Jane Ann Krentz and J.T. Ellison, asked me in a conversation what I thought the next big thing would be. And I said the Gothic, because you can kind of feel little, if you're paying attention, little kind of ripples of um, something to come. And indeed, the Gothic has really stormed back, and
Yes.
it's taking all kinds of forms. But there are, I think, elements that are specific to the Gothic, one of which certainly comes into play in the House of Devil's Neck, because a Gothic really does require some kind of setting, whether it's the Castle of Otranto or the House of Usher,
Yes.
or, Martin Edwards has written several recent Gothics to get
Yeah.
things moving along. Um, Alice Feeney wrote, I can't remember the title, but she wrote a very interesting Gothic with kind of supernatural elements set in, was it Devon or Cornwall? I can't remember, one or the
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
involving water and a bay. And then, of course, Rebecca is kind of one
Oh,
of,
yes. One
yeah.
of the greats of the 20th century. Absolutely.
Yeah, but if you look at them all, they all require some kind of amazing house, usually a large
Yes.
house. Small one
Yeah.
doesn't really allow you enough play, to have haunted rooms and all the rest of it. But what that really creates is the same kind of enclosed structure that an Agatha Christie, which is definitely not
Exactly.
Gothic, but that same country house, enclosed setting wherein everything happens and the outside
Mhm.
world doesn't necessarily cross into it, is sort of
Yes.
part of the Gothic.
Well, I think Christie's And Then There Were None is very much a Gothic novel. I
Absolutely.
think it's a novel which is steeped in atmosphere, but which also has a very kind of, I suppose, a bleak, misanthropic outlook to it, which strikes me as being very Gothic.
Because you
But
have the island and you have the structure. I mean, it's a
yes,
double
it's
Gothic,
perfect.
if
You
you
have
wish.
the kind of merciless elements, and yes, it's and of course that is a classic that everyone should read. But I think there's particularly focusing on the Golden Age, who done it with the puzzle elements, which are so fascinating to me. I think there's a thread, if you like, that can be traced all the way back to Edgar Allan Poe. Often he is cited as having written one of the earliest locked room mysteries, Murders in the Rue Morgue. He was a great innovator of detective fiction. I mean, he only wrote technically only wrote the 3 detective stories featuring Auguste Dupin, but they were so influential that I think their kind of ripples are still being felt even today. But to me, yeah, setting is very important in the Gothic, and I have throughout the Spectre series, I have enjoyed leaning into the familiar tropes of the Golden Age, but embracing the Gothic and the kind of well, I mentioned surreal, but I suppose kind of hyper real. Everything is kind of heightened. There's a grand guignol aspect to everything, and I thought I will try to kind of amp things up even further in the House at Devil's Neck. So I have incorporated a seance as a key element of the plot. So Spectre, who is my sleuth, who's a retired magician, so that's the magic element that I was talking about. He views crime as a kind of a trick or a gimmick to be explained as you would unravel the mechanics of a magic trick. But he is part of this small group that takes a trip out to the house at Devil's Neck. Devil's Neck being a small island tethered to the mainland by a very narrow causeway, which is loosely based on Osea Island here in the UK, which also I think inspired Susan Hill's The Woman in Black, another great Gothic novel. But he goes out there to this house, which is virtually derelict on this island, to participate in a seance to try and summon the spirit of a deceased soldier of the First World War. So that's the basic premise for the plot of the House at Devil's Neck. We have a kind of ragtag band of travelers who are from various walks of life, all drawn together in this unlikely scenario, and inevitably they find themselves stranded because of because of the storm and the tides, etc. And whilst they are there, they conduct this seance with this very flamboyant spiritualist medium. And then a string of murders begins throughout the evening, with members of the party being picked off in weird and gruesome ways one by one. And so Spectre is called on to try and unravel what's really going on and where its roots in the past lie, to explain the present circumstances. And of course, this is another very Gothic trope, the idea of the past returning. It can manifest literally in the imagery of the ghost story, this idea of a physical representation of the past coming back, but also in writing about the First World War, I thought it would be interesting to engage with the different permutations of that kind of haunted past. So we have, memories and I suppose the foreshadowing of the Second World War as well, which is obviously on the horizon, because Devil's Neck is set in 1939, just on the cusp of the Second World War. So I thought it would be interesting to create a kind of Gothic doubling, if you like, because we as the readers know that the Second World War is on the horizon. Our characters don't, but they are still haunted by the trauma and the horror of the First World War. So it's this idea of things returning unbidden, if you like.
Well, I do think, that it's essential that there be past crimes, probably bigger than misdemeanors, buried secrets. I mean, part of a Gothic is is unveiling those, digging into them. And whether the haunted house is haunted by actual specters or whether it's haunted by all of that. So I mentioned that we had a really great review yesterday in the New York Times. So I'm going to quote a little bit of it. But let me say my own comment. Joseph Spectre travels with a coach party through the rainy English countryside to visit an allegedly haunted house on a lonely island. The house, first built by a notorious alchemist and oculist, I love the fact that you got both of them in there, was later used as a field hospital in World War I before falling into disrepair. So, I mean, England is kind of rich with potential mansions or estates for the Gothic. And part of it
Yes.
is that the two wars just sort of decimated the old
Yes.
country house landscape.
Yeah.
So what the New York Times says, which I agree with totally, when a storm blows in, flooding the causeway and stranding the party there, someone or something begins picking them off one by one. At the same time, the Scotland Yard inspector George Flint, because we haven't really mentioned George here,
No, he's
and
my
let me
Lestrade, if
just
you like.
yeah, well, let me say that, Joseph Spector is a musician. He is not actually in law enforcement. And if you really want to have that golden age finale where the bad guy is hauled off, to jail or to the hanging
Yes.
or whatever, you do require a policeman. So here we have George Flint establishing a connection between two suicides 25 years apart. That leads him straight to Devil's Neck. Mead keeps so many tops spinning that the narrative can feel overwhelming. But after the date changes from August 1939 to September and a new war begins, the locked room, who is kept in and who is shut out, takes on greater meaning. I thought that Sarah, wrote Sarah Weinman, who wrote that, fastened on a really key point there that we haven't talked about, which is, does the fact that we're leaving the interwar peace, so to speak, and moving into a new war,
Mm.
lend the locker room idea greater significance that people are, I don't know. I
Um,
mean, I thought it was
I
a comment worth exploring.
Absolutely. I did love that review by Sarah Weinman. I thought it was very insightful because well, for one thing, she gave a very effective précis of the plot, which packed in a lot of the details, because it is, a self-consciously complex plot that does pack a lot into a comparatively short word count, but or at least that was the idea. But yes, the idea of the locked room. I mean, I think locked room mysteries generally are probably the most, or among the most, self-aware of the crime fiction subgenres, because I think there is an awareness of form in the locked room mystery that is perhaps not there in other fields of crime fiction. You from the outset, both the writer and the reader enter into a kind of contract to to play fair and to lay out the clues and all this kind of thing. But I also think that writers like Carr, who were so adept at tricking the reader, had a very sophisticated insight into psychology, not necessarily the psychology of characters, which is a different thing, but the psychology of readers, and understanding that most readers who tackle this kind of thing are going to have a pre-existing bedrock of knowledge about crime fiction and mysteries, know how they work and know what makes them work. And to me, that's part of the fun and the charm of it, because it enables the writer to set up elaborate double bluffs and this kind of thing. But I also think that that self-awareness feels very, I suppose, postmodern, postmodern before postmodern, if you like. In books like The Hollow Man, you have instances where Carr breaks the fourth wall and addresses the reader directly about various permutations of the mystery, and it's very playful. and it's very creative, very theatrical and entertaining. But I also think, as you say, and as Sarah Weinman has kind of implied there, that the locked room is also a very potent psychological symbol, if you like. I suppose the idea of an impossible crime is just as appealing as a ghost story in a way, because I suppose it taps into the same kind of subconscious drives and fascinations in readers. I suppose it makes us it creates a sense of wonder and of the uncanny, which is something that is present in Gothic fiction and ghost stories, but is also present in the world of stage magic. So I think there's something very when you dig a little deeper into the subgenre, and you kind of explore exactly why it works the way it does, you start to find some really interesting questions, not just about plot mechanics, but about readers and about what makes them tick.
Well, I think one thing, and you touched on it already, is that a locked room mystery does not wax on to 400 pages like a thriller. This one is 273. And I do think that it's a more concentrated, more concise reading experience than, I mean, Chris Pavone, an author whom I greatly admire, has a Substack now thing that he does, and he was talking about um, whether brevity or length appeals more to readers and the sort of pros and cons of whether, it's a 500 or 600 page book or a 250 page book. But I think that The Locked Room really needs to be relatively concise. I mean, Christie herself thought that her book should be fairly short. I think her ideal was like 130 pages. And I've always loved her reasoning, which is that, I mean, we're talking golden age when you had this kind of structure for your evening. She wanted people to be able to pick up her book and read it before going to bed, so
Yeah.
that the plot, which was complicated, would stay in the reader's head throughout the whole thing. Then she
Yes.
thought that if it were too long and people put it down, that the plot, the effect of the plot would not be as great, or maybe the reader wouldn't be able to solve it.
Yes, well, I think something else that connects the Locked Room mystery to the world of stage magic is that neither of them hold up to too much scrutiny. So it's best not to draw these things out. I think in a magic show, for instance, there's an element of accumulation, a piling up of effects, and before you can think too deeply about one particular visual, then the next one comes along. And in a Locked Room mystery, you are I think that the word count does have a very definite part to play in the effectiveness. That's not to say that that there aren't any real rules for this kind of thing, though there have been many people over the years who've outlined unbreakable rules for detective fiction, locked room mysteries, psychological thrillers, hard-boiled fiction. There are a lot of rules out there, but to be honest, there are just as many potent examples which break all of those rules. But
Yeah.
Personally, as a reader, I think that Christie was on to something in that a leaner mystery really allows you to concentrate on the puzzle. And so that's the approach that I've always taken with these Spectre books. I try to pack a lot into them because, like that magic show, it's all about it's all about distraction techniques and sleight of hand and a kind of literary leisure demand to try and bamboozle people. But really, at the end of the day, it's about pursuing a comparatively simple effect, but making it feel fresh and exciting to the reader each time.
I really like the way, and this is absolutely not a spoiler, but the last four lines of this book on page 273 are just so great, the way they set things up. He, being Inspector Flint, turned back from the window and found he was alone. All that remained of Spectre was a pungent whiff of cigarillo smoke. What a bloody awful mess, he said to the empty office. On the desk in front of him, the telephone began to ring. That's so because that really is kind of like that herald that the war is starting and things are going to change. Now, that's Inspector Flint. This is your fourth book. Are you anticipating writing another Joseph Spectre?
Yes, I will. I'll keep writing them as long as people want them, really. But I mean, the first two were written purely for pleasure anyway. I wrote them during 2020, the COVID lockdowns here in the UK. So I wrote the first one, Death and the Conjurer, really because I was reading so many Golden Age mysteries at the time. And so it was an exercise in escapism, a very necessary exercise. And it was, at the time, it was about trying to kind of, I suppose, take the lessons from John Dixon Carr, Clayton Rawson, Agatha Christie, Cristiana Brand, and try to distill all of their great work into something, something new and creative that I could really get my teeth into. And that ended up being Death and the Conjurer. But because all of those authors, well, not so much Cristiana Brand, but Christie and Carr were incredibly prolific, and they wrote these long-running series. As soon as I had a workable draft of Death and the Conjurer, I started work straight away on the Murder Wheel, because I thought, that was how they must have done it. As soon as they type the end on one manuscript, they start up the next one. And so I thought I'll try and emulate that approach. So that's how I ended up writing the first two quite quickly and without having a publisher in mind at all. But now that the house at Devil's Neck is out and we're into the Second World War, if you like, to me it's important to retain the Golden Age, the feel of the Golden Age, even in books which are set outside of those specific decades. So I mean, Carr carried on writing long after the Second World War, as did Christie, of course. But they retained the I suppose that lively instinct for contriving a puzzle, even in the later books. I mean, books like Agatha Christie's Halloween Party, that was one of the earliest of hers that I read, and that is a book that's long after the Golden Age, and yet it feels very Golden Age in its approach, and it has a brilliant, deceptively simple trick in it, which I really love, and which I've often tried to create my own version of that trick. I won't say anything about it, but I have a lot of affection for that book, even though it is long after the Golden Age. It retains the certain indefinable something that.
But do you actually feel driven to move forward, or do you feel if you're writing a series with Spectre that you have to advance in time, or can you go backwards?
Like the idea. Yeah, I quite like the idea of keeping the Golden Age, but moving forward in time. Having said that, I'm also not averse to delving further back in time. I'm not particularly precious about chronology, but now that we're on the cusp of the Second World War, I feel like it would be very fertile territory for further Gothic shenanigans for Spectre and Flint. So it seems like it seems that circumstances have kind of pulled me in that direction, and so I just kind of going with the flow at the moment.
One last question before I call Patrick up. There was some conversation in the material that came with the book. I love the way publishers they they include written material when they send you an advanced reading copy like this to kind of direct your reading, and provide a biography very often for the author. But they also try to hit little potential sales hooks, one of them being something to the effect that this was, I think I put that away, headed for the screen. So is there in fact a production going on for the series?
Well, yes. So the rights to the Joseph Spectre series were optioned last year, and the script is in development, I think, is the
Right.
the parlance. There's Frustratingly, there's not too much I can say at this point, just because I don't know much. But I do know that a script is in the offing. I've been warned that these things can take a very long time. So but I mean, the very fact that the option has been sold in the first place was a big moment for me, as as somebody who, as I say, wrote these stories initially just to entertain myself. It's nice that there's that level of interest, and that they have a life beyond the page. But yeah, I can't give any concrete details except to
Oh,
say
I
that a
just
script
just
is
was
in the
curious
works.
since I brought it up. I
Yeah,
thought somebody will
no,
be able
absolutely.
to
I
vote
mean,
yes.
it's very exciting, and yes, hopefully it's something that will. Um,
Well, there's an extraordinary amount of British crime shows on
mm,
television, on BritBox, on Acorn, on public, whatever. So ITV, whatever it is. So, that with all these channels, there's a very good chance that, they'll, and COVID, to be fair, really revived an interest in reading classics that we did not see
yes,
before
yes,
then. And I'm not just talking crime classics, but we have a whole surprisingly large section of classic mysteries that involve, I don't know, Cormac McCarthy or, Alice in Wonderland, or it's really fascinating to me how that section turns over so much because before
yeah,
COVID, we didn't really see much of it. And I think as a reader of either romance or mystery, in particular, maybe even science fiction, that if you know what the classics are, if you read them and you know what distinguishes, these different genres, I think it really can enhance your enjoyment of reading. You
yes,
can see somebody riffing on a Christie or, writing a Gothic, and that means nothing to you.
mm,
How much better if
yeah,
you actually have some understanding of what
yeah.
the author is doing.
Absolutely. Well, I think this goes back to, particularly with the mystery, which obviously is my particular area of interest, but within the locked room subgenre, that level of self-awareness and that idea that readers are going to have this pre-existing knowledge, it adds a dimension to the
Right.
puzzle and to the kind of gameplay, if you like, because it places the reader and the writer on more level footing, if you like. So I'm all for it. This is why I make a point of playing on established tropes and motifs of the Golden Age, but trying to subvert them and do something a bit different from time to time, just to keep the reader on their toes.
I think that's a very wise approach. So, Patrick, come and join us and see if you have any questions of your own or comments from the audience.
All right, let's see. Um, there are some questions that have come in. Actually, Sky Kathleen Moody, is on the chat, and I was just exchanging messages with her. Um, let's see. Well, there was a question, first of all, about Tom, about your accent, and there are a couple people who are interested in knowing where in the United Kingdom you hail from.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's not a question that crops up very often. Well, I'm in Derby, which is in the Midlands, so right in the middle of England. So uh, yeah, it's about 90 minutes from London on the train, but it's yeah, right in the middle of the Peak District. So we're surrounded by hills and gorgeous countryside all around, and things like that. But we are, but it's also convenient for the big cities as well.
Gotcha. Let's see. Okay. Before we went live, I was commenting on Tom's all the cool stuff in the background, and a few people on the chat here are curious too. Yeah, let's see.
What these bits and
If there's
pieces here.
time, it says if there's time, will you ask Tom what is his most favorite treasure on the bookcase behind him?
Oh, well, I mean, my favorite, I have some real treasures, book-wise. They're not in this room, but I have my signed John Dixon Carr, which was a real, when I found that, that was a real, a real joy. That was a copy of his biography that he wrote of Arthur Conan Doyle, and it was signed. That book was published 1952, I think, and he came to London for a meeting of the Baker Street Irregulars, the Sherlock Holmes Appreciation Society, and he signed a bunch of copies for visitors at that event, and so I managed to snag one of those. So that's a real treasure of mine, and also a first edition copy of Cristiana Brand's Death of Jezebel, which I've talked about previously. So they're my two treasures, and neither of them is particularly hard to come by. I mean, there are copies floating around, and of all the signed Carr editions out there, the Conan Doyle biography is probably the least difficult to track down. But personally, for me, those two books mean a great deal.
What are all those interesting little bottles? Are those
These are just various miniatures from various bits and pieces, various liqueurs and what have you. I should say they're not mine. I am teetotal. They're just
indiscretions of
display models.
Gotcha. Let's see. Oh, maybe you already mentioned this, but John Dixon Carr wrote under the pseudonym Carter Dixon as well, right?
Yeah.
Were
Well,
those not the locked room ones, or were there the
no,
books?
they were as well. What happened with John Dixon Carr was that he was so prolific, that his publisher was wary of putting out more John Dixon Carr titles for fear of flooding the market. So rather than curbing his creativity, he carried on writing, but he published a separate series, a kind of separate branch of fiction, under the Carter Dixon name. And obviously it was an open secret. Everybody knew that it was him, but it was a kind of loophole that enabled him to carry on writing as much as he wanted and making money from his books. But yeah, the Carter Dixon books are no less brilliant than the John Dixon Carrs. I wrote an introduction to the American Mystery Classic reissue of the Red Widow Murders, which is one of the best Carter Dixon novels, in my opinion. That is another very fun, spooky one, which has a great puzzle at its heart.
You know, there are other authors, though, that have run into the same thing. Ruth Rendell, for example.
Yes,
Partly it
absolutely.
was to distinguish, and I'm trying to desperately to remember what her other name was, and I'm
Barbara
trying.
Vine.
Barbara Vine. Yeah.
Barbara Vine, thank you. I knew it was a V. I just couldn't come up with it. But part of it was that she was so prolific, and part of it was that the Barbara Vine books, she wanted to distinguish them from the Ruth Rendell brand, so to speak.
Well, the Barbara Vines are interesting to me because they lose the police procedural element, which is
Right.
there in the Inspector Wexfords, of course, which published as Ruth Rendell. But to me, some of the Barbara Vines are, if anything, more golden age in their plotting. I know that Ruth Rendell had a very complicated relationship with the golden age mystery. She was sometimes quite disdainful of Agatha Christie, for instance, but I think she was almost a kind of an unwilling golden age great, if you like, because to me the subtlety of the way that the clues are woven throughout some of the Barbara Vine novels, even though the clues may be more psychological in nature rather than a specific detail that would crop up in an Agatha Christie, I think the way that she reveals them, and the way that she plays with reader expectations is very golden age, whether she liked it or not.
Mhm.
She's probably due for a resurgence at some point soon.
Oh, I think so. Some of her Wexfords were brilliant, and she wrote a few standalones as Rendell. That
Mm.
I think one of them was called The Stranger or something similar. That was absolutely
Yeah.
superb. And an American
I've,
author.
I've been on a bit of a Ruth Rendell kick at the moment. Now I've got a bunch of them down here. In fact, I most recently finished The Chimney Sweeper's Boy, which is a Barbara Vine, from about 1997. And to me, it was the most brilliant mystery, even though um, there's no murder, there's no police investigation, and yet it's a kind of psychological mystery, and you have to know. It's very compulsive.
Oh, she was a great stylist, unquestionably. And we know some American authors who've run into this. You can't publish that many books a year.
Mm.
Brett Battles, for example, who's currently writing the Stuart Woods franchise, wrote a great series to start with, and he wanted to publish more than one book a year, and he was not allowed to, so he started self-publishing and did really well. And that's a tool that authors have today that they can use more effectively. Um, because of the support
Yes.
for self-publishing. And so there are writers who,
Yeah.
can go that route if they want to get out of
Yeah.
write more
I,
often.
I I have read some really impressive self-published
Mhm.
fiction. James Scott Burnside is somebody who writes great locked rooms that are self-published, and I think there's a lot less snobbery about self-publishing now. For instance, here in the UK, the Crime Writers Association now embraces self-published authors as well as traditionally published authors. There are more opportunities because the fact that a book is self-published does not a self-published book can readily match some traditionally published books in terms of quality and in terms of innovation and creativity.
Right, but the challenge for self-publishing is obviously its visibility. The production part of it is pretty simple now, but it does take a lot to get. This week alone, I just picked up my Edelweiss thing. There are 1,400 new books publishing. 300 and some of them are adult hardcover fiction. And,
Yeah,
how to achieve any visibility in a
yeah.
marketplace that crowded.
Well, that's the most daunting challenge, I suppose, and this is why I admire authors who self-publish, because I not only would I lack the technical nous to put it together, but I wouldn't have a clue where to begin when it comes to building a readership and a following, because I
Yeah, but
suppose the most effective ones are the ones which generate word of mouth, and I mean really the only way to do that is to write very well, but also to actively cultivate a readership, and it seems such a demanding exercise in itself.
Well, it is demanding, but there are social media, TikTok, Book Talk, all that stuff does provide channels that, if you're willing to do it, can really help you reach an audience. The problem is, if you're a writer and you're spending half your time marketing, it really cuts into your time you're spending writing. But that's a whole different question. We used to see that happen in an art gallery next door to us in the original Poison Pen. Is every year it would get somebody new, and they would come in and say, well, this is my art and all. Why should I pay a middleman when I can just, sell it myself and make more money? But the problem was they exited every year at the end of the season, like May or June, because they were too busy running an art gallery to actually be creative and do their art. And so that
Yeah,
that is the potential conundrum for self-publishing, is how much time can you put into marketing, because you're going to
that's
be
it.
doing it.
I mean, I think wherever you are on the publishing spectrum, promoting your work and meeting readers and engaging with readers, speaking to them face to face, whether it's at virtual events like this or whether it's at an in person at a bookshop or a library or a festival or whatever, it to me, it's a very different beast to the act of actually sitting at a desk and typing. They're kind of writing is the kind of, by its nature, it's a very insular profession, and it can writers are not necessarily show people, they're not performers in the way that magicians are, you know. So when I write about magic, I'm kind of living out my vicarious showmanship, which I
Here you are talking to me, Tom. So yeah, so it is in its
There
own
was,
way. That's exactly what you're doing is marketing. Patrick, anything else in there?
yeah, there actually was a question about do you perform magic yourself?
Yeah, now I always get this question, and I always have to disappoint people because no, I don't have the leisure demand. I have tried for years and years to master the sleight of hand trick. So again, these books are these are the closest that I get, really. This is my again, it's kind of wish fulfillment. This is the writer's prerogative to create a great illusionist because he couldn't be one himself, you know.
Well, you've done an amazing job. I'll give a shout out to Louisa Smith, my friend, who is the editor of Penzler Publishing,
Yes,
The Mysterious Press, whichever way you want to call it, and Charles
yeah.
Perry, the
Louisa,
publisher.
Louisa did a
And long
wonderful
may
job.
they continue to publish you and other wonderful works that they're doing. Thank you all very much for joining us. Our autograph copies should be in probably Wednesday or Thursday this week, and I urge you to try it. As Patrick pointed out, we do have the earlier books, although you do not
Yeah,
have to read these in order to
yeah.
enjoy them. I mean, it's
There
a
we go.
different reading experience if you start way back at the beginning. And both Patrick and I recommend the Crippen and Landry short story collection. What's it called again, Patrick?
It's called the Indian rope trick.
Right. So, if you like just sort of taking a short break and delving into something, short story collections are ideal for that. Read one before bed. Kind of the Agatha Christie thing, have
That's it
dinner, read a
exactly.
short story, figure it out, go to bed. Perfect. Anyway, Tom, great to see you.